Having that said, it's a little bit after 10 o'clock, so allow me to introduce myself and explain my role here. My name is Percy Turner. I work for the Wichita State University's Community Engagement Center. I am here in a facilitation role, but also in partnering with the Community Connections team that has both folks on the from Wichita State University and people from KDADS. Today, we will be having a question and answer session with Russell Bowles, who's part of the KDADS team. And a little later on coming in will be Colin Rourke. Russell is a representative of our review team. He is the director of desk review. Colin is a representative of the Heightened Scrutiny team. He's the director of Heightened Scrutiny. And so we are aiming today to provide as much support as we can for providers trying to get through the remediation and heightened scrutiny process in regards to the final rule and the remediation portion of us coming into compliance with the final rule. So as I've spoken a little bit before, we are asking folks to do one of three things in order to ask questions. There's going to be a brief bit of talking from Russell. He is going to give some updates around remediation and heightened scrutiny. And then once that is over, the rest of the time will be up to providers to ask questions. If you have the ability to, we would like you to click the reactions portion of your, the kind of bottom menu on the screen. It is a circle with a smiley face and a plus on it. If you have the latest version of Zoom, you will have the option to raise your hand. When you hit that button, you will see a hand kind of comes up in the corner of your screen, the left top corner of your screen. And so we will acknowledge that. And then I will lower your hand and we will answer your question. If you don't have the option to do that or you can't find it, feel free to hit the chat function. You can also use Alt-H to open your chat, and you can type your question in there, and Zane or myself will read that question and we will answer it from there. If you are using the phone, you will have to unmute and say your name. We will acknowledge you, and then you can ask your question and we will answer it to the best of our ability. We do ask that everybody mute themselves so that we can keep as much order as possible. If you are on the phone, you will unmute using *6. So with that being said, let me go ahead and introduce Russell Bowles, the director of desk review, to come up and say a few words and give us some updates. Russ?
Thank you, Percy. And again, yeah, I would like to welcome everybody that has joined us, and we'll welcome all your questions. We'll start off with kind of describing a little bit about the process and what we're doing here, what the final rule is, and that is CMS's guidance to us in actual federal regulation that says we need to come into compliance with certain aspects of the regulation as a state, and which trickles down to each provider and setting. So with that process, we put together an assessment that went out for settings to complete in late 2019 through early 2020. And with some questions to answer. And what we wanted to take at that particular time was whatever policies, procedures you had in place, submit them through that, and we'll see where everybody stands as a baseline. Once we completed that process, we moved into what is called the remediation and heightened scrutiny phase. Those are just two methods of assessing or working on through the remediation process that works towards helping all providers, settings, and the state of Kansas come into compliance with the federal regulation called the final rule. All right, so with that, one of the biggest differences that I wanted to talk about on remediation and heightened scrutiny. Remediation and heightened scrutiny can be and is encouraged to be conducted concurrently or happening at the same time. So you may be getting outreach from both. The remediation team went through and reviewed the assessment questions and evidence that was submitted for those. And then we sent back a notification of whether that question for each setting was compliant or not compliant with the rule. Not a big problem. That's just a baseline to let us know where we can start from. So with that, we ask that you, as providers and settings, go into your settings and for each question, select a strategy and then upload new evidence that would help come into compliance. So once that has done, then our validators and reviewers will look at that evidence, and then they will be able to respond back in the remediation process. Under the remediation tab, they'll let you know what was good about the evidence and what still needs to be worked with the evidence. So it's a more direct process, and we are hoping it's a little helpful, and we have found that there are still some questions, and therefore that's why we would reach out to everybody and offer this opportunity. We do want to let everyone know there are a lot of resources available. If you, excuse me, go to the Remediation Resources tab on the Community Connections ks.org website. On the home page, it'll drop down a list of very helpful resources for you. One of them is in the remediation process, what makes good evidence and what is actually being looked for. And that would be listed under evidence guidance. There is a provider remediation handbook that's also listed in that, and that will help individuals kind of do a step-by-step, how do you get to the remediation tab? What do you do in it? How does it work kind of thing as well. After reviewing over 100,000 pieces of evidence on the initial assessment and continued discussions with CMS, our federal partners, we have found that policies and procedures in the remediation process work best to show CMS the compliance process. So that is that part. So the major difference between Heightened Scrutiny team and the Heightened Scrutiny tab and the Remediation tab comes into place as the Remediation tab is where everything lives and your final compliance will come from. With that, there are certain questions that trigger Heightened Scrutiny categories 1 and categories 2, which are based solely on location. So it's nothing you need to change, nothing you need to do. It's just based solely on location. And I'll kind of talk about that a little more under the Heightened Scrutiny piece. So we will review anything that is may appear to trigger a possibility of isolation, and there are ways to put into policy how to remediate the to show that it's not isolating for individuals under the category 3 process. And then once everybody is complete, it shows in the remediation tab your compliance status for each setting. And then also it'll show the compliance status of how many settings you have and how many are compliant. And if all of them are compliant, the two numbers should match. Heightened Scrutiny is a process where they actually, CMS has required the team to go out and do an on-site assessment. Due to the pandemic and things of that nature, the Heightened Scrutiny team has been conducting those assessments virtually. and they have been very successful at getting those done. So with that, I will kind of, Colin will be joining us a little bit later, so I am going to present some information that he provided for us, and then we'll go from that. So some dates, July of 2021, Category 3 only settings still have until July to implement remediation strategies, to have the Category 3 designation removed, and not initiate further review by the Heightened Scrutiny team and CMS. So that really would not be much of more work for you guys. It just means that maybe prioritizing any of those Heightened Scrutiny Category 3 questions as they show up. And Category 3 is any settings that have the effect of isolating individuals receiving Medicaid home and community-based services from the broader community of individuals not receiving Medicaid home and community-based services. All right, so that's what that is. And those are for the most part, Category 3, you can remediate through policy and procedure very easily. And what we will help you through that process if need be. So the Heightened Scrutiny team continues conducting and scheduling Heightened Scrutiny virtual assessments. Overall, things that have been going really well. Updates that have been required of settings have been relatively minor. So as we thought, everybody's doing a lot of the stuff they need to be doing in their processes. So it's just making sure a lot of times that their policies and procedures are in place to show that. All right, so remediation of all non-compliant questions should continue. That would be in the remediation tab during the Heightened Scrutiny process. The setting may be in full compliance of final settings rule to continue providing HCBS services after March 17th of 2023. So we still do have some time. We will continue to work with those sites, whether they have been determined to be in heightened scrutiny or not, that we'll continue working with those. The ongoing monitoring will be utilized to ensure policies and procedures are implemented as written, and follow up on any plans from heightened scrutiny summaries to ensure full compliance. We are still in the process of discussing with CMS how they will allow us to do our ongoing monitoring process. So we will let everyone know as soon as we have that approval from CMS. So we can continue on with that process. The Heightened Scrutiny team is dedicated to working with all willing and able settings to come into compliance. Once the assessment is complete, if updates are necessary and there is any confusion, they'll work with the settings to provide promising practices and other suggestions for compliance that have received from CMS and through conducting assessments. As a reminder, Heightened Scrutiny settings can communicate with the Heightened Scrutiny team via the two-way communication feature found on the Heightened Scrutiny tab. Again, that would be for settings that are in Category 1 and Category 2. If you are Category 3 only, you'll do all of your remediation for Category 3 Heightened Scrutiny through the remediation tab, so you won't need the two-way communication opened up. It is important that any myths or misconceptions are addressed to ease concerns. We do not want settings to worry about assessments and or closure due to non-compliance. As we've discovered through review, many of you are already comply or have very little to implement in order to comply. Regardless, the purpose of the assessment is to determine the setting's level of compliance. The Heightened Scrutiny team will work with all willing and able settings to complete a summary with plans, timelines as necessary to show how the setting will comply prior to the March 17, 2023 date. To reiterate, if a setting is not in compliance at the time of assessment, there is still time to come up with plans and timelines in order to be in compliance prior to the transition deadlines. We also like to reiterate that any restrictions are to the person-centered. It is still necessary for behavior support plans and approved restrictions to be utilized, keeping in mind that the setting and its policies and procedures should indicate the least restrictive environment. Right. Thank you. That is what I have from Colin. So thank you, Percy. We'll open it up.
Okay, so I have received a question. It is heightened scrutiny in nature. So Russ, if you can answer it, great. If not, we'll have to kind of put it aside and bring Colin up to speed on it. But it is a provider has had a meeting, has had their virtual assessment already, March 3rd, and they haven't heard anything back yet. And they're just trying to figure out what the norm is for that. Is there a lag time, or is there some sort of advice that we can give to this provider to continue on while waiting?
Yeah, there is a lag time because the team has to then complete a summary, put that together. So there is a little bit of a lag time. They are doing almost one assessment a day per assessor. So yes, please give them a little bit of time to get that summary put in place. What can a provider do in the time period? It is highly recommended to continue with the remediation process and continue working to have all of the questions in the remediation tab become compliant. We will help with that. And normally that does help a lot with meeting full compliance for the heightened scrutiny side as well.
Thank you, Russ. I really appreciate that. And I hope that that answers the question that was posed to me. If there are any other questions, I don't see any in chat right now. If you are looking to, and as I say that, Amy asks, where do we add a new location if one opened after this process has started? And how long does it typically take for that site to get added to the provider dashboard? And then it looks like we have both, we have two questions of people using the raised hand function. So we will address those. Looks like Teresa got in there first, and then we'll go to Paul. Russ, you want me to read that question again?
No, I have it on that.
Okay.
So any setting that is opened up after the original assessment took place will, on the very homepage, I guess is what we call it, the homepage for communityconnectionsks.org, scroll down towards the bottom, there's a place to notify the Community Connections team of your new setting. It goes in there. Again, those settings will come in under our ongoing monitoring process, because that will also include new settings in that process. So as soon as that is approved by CMS, we will reach out to the contact that is on that form and let you know that what the process will be from there going forward. So we don't have a specific time period for that, but again, it's kind of dependent on CMS letting us know what we can do.
And this is LaTanya. Russell, I'd like to follow up on that because I get this question all the time. So all of you, just when you fill out that form, you've done your part, move on, it's okay. It's on KDAD's desk then. So you've done your part. Just make sure when you get those new settings, you fill out that form on the communityconnectionsks.org website. I think Zane just put the link in there for you to save, and you've done your part. That we have that, we've documented that. And as Russell had just said, when we get ready for those processes, then we'll follow up and reach out to you on what you need to do. Thank you.
And those of you who are not familiar with LaTanya, she is our Community Connections KS communications and training specialist. So she receives she's what helped set up this training and works with responding out and outreach to a lot of providers. So we work very closely together on all this. Thank you.
Okay, I am going to ask Teresa to unmute. And she can go ahead and answer questions.
My question is, it says that the heightened security is in progress. Are they going, if they haven't contacted me yet, will they? And what happens if this isn't resolved by July 20th?
Okay. Again, I'm not sure what the July 20th is. We're utilizing July 1st, just to clarify on the date. But as far as heightened scrutiny can show up as either category 1, category 2, or category 3. So with that, if it is a category 1 or category 2, you should have in the heightened scrutiny tab a two-way communication that you should be able to reach out to them and say, hey, if you are only in category 3, then you would be able to continue that process through the remediation tab. So first, I guess let's clarify what questions would put you in category 1 and 2. And those are questions in the C section, and they're questions C1 and or C2.
Yeah,
So
it's a
with
C2.
that, okay, so if it's a C2, then you should be able to go then to the heightened scrutiny tab. And if it's not opened up for you at that point, we can go ahead and reach out to either myself or LaTanya or through the Community Connections chat, and we'll make sure that we get that open for you.
Yeah, this is LaTanya. You can reach out to me because, yeah, I will communicate with the team to get your two-way communication open if it's not open yet. And I'll put my email address in the chat.
Okay, thank you very much for your question. We are now going to move over to Paul. I'm going to ask Paul to unmute. So go ahead, Paul, when you're ready.
Thank you very much. My question is, my agency was flagged for heightened scrutiny. We then moved, so I have now closed that particular site. I want to thank LaTanya for helping me with that aspect of the process. I just want to make sure I'm doing the right thing now. I think I need to go into the HCBS notification form page and open a new site. Is that correct? Yes. And then what next? What should I expect after that?
Okay, so question real quick to clarify is, was that, would your new setting, would it possibly fall into a category 1 or category 2 heightened scrutiny? That would be a location near an institution.
I don't think so, but I didn't think my other site would have fallen into that also. I just moved like a block away. So I guess I honestly can't answer that for sure, but I don't think so.
Okay. Well, if you've already worked with LaTanya on the closing of your previous site,
yeah,
then, you know, if that was your only setting that you have,
yes, it is.
okay, then we would actually talk to you about just completing the process, even though that setting doesn't exist, so that you can still get through the compliance process and we can take a look at all of your things. So that's kind of an individual. We'd have to take a look at your particular setting and everything, and talk with you and make sure we're clear on what you want to do. So there is the option to leave that particular setting assessment open and continue to work through the process. We would notify that the Heightened Scrutiny team that it's a new setting location, that this one would be closed, and we would work through that as an individual one-to-one case. So if you could make sure to reach out LaTanya so that we can reach out to Colin and his team to find out how we need to proceed further.
Okay.
And Paul, this is LaTanya. I have your information. I'll make a note to follow up with you. Thank
Okay.
you. I'll follow up with you.
Okay. Thank you, Tanya. I appreciate that. But just just to clarify in my own mind, then I what I need to do is open up a new site and go from there. That is correct, isn't it?
That is correct. Yeah, you would need to go to that homepage on Community Connections. I think Zane put that link in the chat earlier, and just let it know that you have a new setting and it's replacing the old setting, and give us the and then talk with you. If it's your only setting, we would like for you to continue the process so that you would be able to, if at all possible, you can just transfer a lot of that information across. So where you're at.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you, Paul.
Okay, we do have some from the chat. So it looks like the one that was asked by Amy Peterson, the majority of this question has kind of been answered in passing. She asks, where do we add a new location if one opened after the process is started? And how long does it typically take to get the site added to the provider dashboard?
Okay, so what will happen is it wouldn't actually go on the provider dashboard at this point. It would go in our internal communication log of settings that have opened. So then once the ongoing monitoring process would take place as approved from CMS, then that gives us the ability to reach out to all of those new settings and let them know what and how that process will be. And again, as I said, we're waiting for some discussion and approval by CMS on what that process will be. So.
Okay, thank you, Russell. So I have one anonymous question that I'm going to bring forward here. It says, there's a residential provider that is refusing to provide transportation to outside day services. This is going as a long-term policy for them, not a COVID procedure. They are refusing targeted case management to allow for transportation to be put into the person-centered support plan. Some individuals do not have natural support systems and are unable to independently utilize public transit, and this residential provider is still refusing to provide any transportation to outside day services. They are also unwilling to work collaboratively with the day service providers to find solutions. This seems out of compliance with the final rule. Is there any insight that can be given around this?
Okay. So to begin, it sounds like the issue is mostly around transportation, and the final rule, and currently to my knowledge, none of the waiver reimbursed services include transportation. So if a provider is refusing to provide transportation, that is entirely up to the provider. Now, what should occur is that there should be, to be compliant with the final rule, they should be provided that the individual should be provided all options and choice for access to the community. So, you know, if the provider is hindering that access, they don't have to provide transportation, but if they're hindering the process, then that would be something we would definitely want to take a look at. But putting transportation in the person-centered plan does not sound like a bad idea. Letting them know what options are available for them to access the community, you know, and even including those things that would be barriers to that access is also good. And that would be handled at the person-centered level in the person-centered documents. So I know that sounds like a really rough and tough situation to be in, but there is not currently any reimbursement for transportation, so providers do not have to provide transportation. They just have to allow information for that access, just like anybody else in the community.
Okay, thank you, Russell. Our next chat question is from Marcella Miller. Says, I don't know, I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. If a policy we have is not worded the way that is requested, do you want us to rewrite the policy before we submit or wait until we receive a response from you?
Okay. Now I'm trying to process the question, so make sure I answer what you're asking. So it sounds like you've submitted your policy through the Community Connections Remediation tab, and you have not heard back about your policy yet. So what we prefer, if that is the situation, would be that you would receive a response back from, okay, I see that. So it sounds like you haven't heard back from the remediation team itself. I would take a look at your policy, make sure it's got some key indicators on it to start with, because I can't tell you what it was rejected for at this point in time. Some key indicators, we want to make sure that we know who the provider is, that the policy belongs to, a name of the policy or a number of the policy, some way to identify that policy, and then make sure there is a revision date or an effective date on that policy. If it is wording, the best recommendation I could make at this point would be to go to the homepage for Community Connections, go to that remediation resources, read through the question information that you're wanting to submit your policy for, and try and word it in a way that it aligns with the guidance. Other than that, we may just have to work through submitting it, making some minor changes to it, submitting it, and then letting our reviewer respond back to you with what was still needs some work and what was good about it. So I know this is somewhat of a process, but we're really working the best we can. So thank you.
Thanks, Russell. She did respond here saying the responses I am getting are rejected with no other feedback other than, quote, evidence not accepted. How do we proceed with those responses?
Yeah, and I'll be honest, we've made some technical advances in our in the Community Connections ks.org website that allowed us to And again, it's a bit of a process, but if that's your initial response from the assessment, once you get into the remediation process, it is more personalized and tells you exactly what it is. So I know it sounds like an added step, and in essence it really is, but we had this update in our system after the assessment was already out, so this process was out. So yes.
Okay, thank you, Russell. I appreciate the follow-up there. Our next question is from Lori Gonzalez, who just wants to confirm if we have the status marked compliant on our self-assessment, we will not have a site visit or need to do anything further.
Yes, if your setting is marked as compliant, then that setting is fully compliant to include through the heightened scrutiny process. If that occurred, no, you would not receive an on-site for that particular setting.
Okay, thank you, Russell. Our next is from Leslie Locking, who says, if a person in supported living resides in a home owned by parents, what can be used for evidence in question E1?
Okay, so they're residing in the parent's home.
No, their parents, his parents own his home, and he lives in supported living.
Okay, and I'm going to assume that the provider is providing the service category called residential.
Yes, we provide a few hours a week in his home.
Okay.
And he does not have a current lease because his parents own the home that he is living in.
Sure. Then for the most part, what we have requested, and even hopefully it kind of covers a lot of that same information. Let me see if I can pull this up. And I will try and put it in chat for you, is a policy that would basically say you would be advocating for the person to not be evicted. And that would be able to be used across any of your settings. So I know it's not as clear cut, but CMS has agreed to that type of a response or a policy that says that you would be able, as a provider, you would advocate for the individual for eviction.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So, and I did just a kind of a, it sounds real canned, but this guidance we got from CMS to kind of help cover that process, because I know that does happen in quite a few that I've been involved with as well. So it's a good question.
Indeed. Okay, moving on, we have a question from Becky. We are a Home Plus and had our virtual walkthrough last week. One of the flags was that our resident doors do not have locks on them. I believe the final rule says each individual has privacy in their sleeping or living unit, and units have entrance doors lockable by the individual with only the appropriate staff having keys to doors. However, to be in compliance with our current state regulation, the resident needs to be able to open the door and exit with one movement. Being a Home Plus with multiple dementia residents, our facility wide policy is to not have locks. What is the next step in dealing with this to come into compliance with the CMS guidelines?
So one, I had where that usually falls into play is with the fire marshal's office. So my recommendation would be to contact the fire marshal's office and ask them what type of lock system would meet the fire marshal's compliance, because the final rule just simply states that the doors must be lockable for privacy. So I would have to defer that to the fire marshal's office to say what kind of system would meet their criteria with all of that.
Okay, thank you, Russ. Our next question is coming from chat. It says, it's from Locke. As proof of community involvement, we submitted pictures of people in service at community events and working in our thrift shop. The pics were ruled unacceptable because they were considered, quote, PHI. So no pictures should be submitted with people pictured.
Okay. So I will have to say I appreciate submitting the pictures and things, but again, as we have had a lot of discussion with CMS, and after reviewing over 100,000 pieces of evidence, we have come back to the best evidence that we can utilize to provide CMS to show compliance is going to be policies and procedures on how that engagement occurs, how the notification of community activities is communicated with the residents and like that. So we are finding that policies and procedures for CMS are pretty much what they're looking for. Pictures can be secondary to that, but again, it's policies and procedures. And that's something that we found out as we have done this. Yes. Go ahead, Percy, read that for us.
Yeah, Locke follows up, are handbooks as good as policy and procedures?
Handbooks are acceptable, provided they, again, have some minimum criteria. One, they would have to be able to identify that the handbook belongs to the provider, and that it covers the information. And again, though, policies and procedures, because they do have effective dates on them, especially, and policies and procedures are something that we can show CMS, this is the provider and this is how they're doing it, and this is how they're asking their staff to communicate with the individuals served, really works the best. But if you can get that in a handbook, we have accepted some that were well written.
Thank you, Russell. Our next question is from Michelle Hill. Michelle says, we have a question regarding I-1.1 and I-2. The first one is, when working, are persons served allowed to participate in deciding their work schedule? And the second is, when not doing paid work, are persons served allowed to participate in deciding their activity schedule? It sounds like policy is the preferred evidence. However, what else would be considered compliant evidence?
For most of that, and that one in particular, I will have to say that a policy has been pretty much what we have seen that meets the criteria. And that would be, you know, stating that, you know, people are able to choose their work schedule the same as those who don't have disabilities. Again, you know, I get it, like most all of us, we get to choose our work schedule to a degree based on what our boss wants. So policy is, for the most part, the best way to support that one. So I'm not really sure there is much of a different way. But we're open. We'll look at just about anything, and then we'll see. So if you have a good idea, you can present that, and we'll look at it, and we'll let you know what's good and what may need work out of what you present, or that lines. So we're not closed-minded on what evidence meets. It's just making sure that we can, if we present it to CMS, can we make a good argument with CMS?
Right.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Russell. And I just want to underline a response from LaTanya talking about that E1 question, just kind of talking about the assurance of the Kansas Tenant Landlord Act would be adhered to for residential settings that that you serve, that CMS is kind of looking for someone to have protections and protections that follow the local law for evictions, even if those people might be living in a residential or a relatives setting. So everybody kind of is afforded that same level of protection. And so in the absence of being able to advocate for oneself, that the facility or the provider would be able to advocate for them, that the laws are properly followed. So I appreciate that follow-up, LaTanya. Thank you. And so does Leslie. So we don't have any more questions in chat. I encourage folks who have questions to go ahead and either put them here in chat or to use the raise hand function. If you are on the phone, feel free to unmute and state your name, and I will acknowledge you, and then we'll proceed with your question. But this time is your time, so feel free. I will give a few minutes. We have one in chat. How long does it take to receive a response from a chat that has been submitted to a ticket? Oh, I can do this one. So it really depends on the nature of the chat. Some chats need to be escalated up, so it may take a little bit longer if we are moving from the self-contained chat to speaking with Russell or LaTanya or another member of another team. There usually is a little bit of a lag time in between there, but we have been clearing tickets fairly quickly. So if your ticket has been escalated, it more than likely is going to a member of one of our remediation or our heightened scrutiny teams. And so there may be a few days, even a week of lag there. However, if you'd like to send me a more private message as to the nature of the ticket, I would love to discuss that with you, and we can try and track it down and figure out exactly where it's at so that you can get a quick response. Okay, we're giving some more time and energy just for questions here in the chat. How do we contact Percy? That's me. I'll put my email in the chat, but 9 times out of 10, if you get an email from HCBS teams, now don't tell anybody because they're supposed to be keeping this kind of secret, but that's me. And I usually will sign my name at the bottom of it. But my email, my personal email is that. So feel free to contact me. I am also a social worker, so if you just need a little final rule therapy, I can also help you with that. I know there's a lot of frustration around this process. So feel free to contact me or follow up with me personally. Thank you. Also, I realize what I just did, and I'm regretting it immediately. Okay, so anybody else with time, with a need, with questions, process questions, chat questions, anything? We do have some things that we've been asked in the past that may help people on their journey into compliance, but we want to make sure that we are addressing all of your questions first. So feel free to unmute, to type in chat, and ask us whatever questions you have.
I have a question.
Okay.
Hello.
Go ahead. I can hear you.
My name's John Clayton, and I work for a limited license agency that serves one person. A lot of our evidence has been rejected based on the fact that our policies are specific to a person and not a policy of the agency. And I'm wondering if there's any flexibility around that, because it seems like quite an exercise to have to rewrite all our policies to be generic and reflective of a situation that just isn't going to occur for us. We're not going to be having transportation issues or roommates sharing bedrooms because there's only one individual that we serve, and that's why we exist. And if that person wasn't receiving our services, the agency would cease to be. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. What we have found, we have quite a few providers that are only serving one or two individuals, and a lot of the policies that we have read have had an individual's name in them or something along that lines. So a lot of times, if you are able to just remove that name and put your agency name in there, that would suffice on a lot of what we have seen so far. Unfortunately, what we do have to follow is being able to prove to CMS that if by chance you was to have a roommate, whether that individual, that roommate is receiving home and community-based services or not, that individual would have the choice. So, and that's kind of like one example of what would occur. So some of it, but you know, we can definitely help you look at and modify your policies, or help you put together some policies that may be absent or silent. So if you are having issues with those, or are not real familiar with policies, because I know that's not a lot of people's fortes, you can please reach out to LaTanya or myself. She put her email in the chat. If you need it, we can re-put it there, and we will schedule some time to work with you.
That would be appreciated, because this has certainly been a challenging exercise, and getting everything rejected is somewhat disheartening.
Understand. Yeah. We have found, though, that a lot of times making small changes makes a big difference. So we can definitely do that. If you want to reach out to LaTanya, she can do that. Schedule.
Very good. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. And we're going to just continue to give time and space for another question. So feel free to type it in the chat or to unmute, and we will do the best that we can to answer your questions. Looks like we have something from Locke in the chat. Folks on our day program work in the community or in the thrift shop, so they are at work during the day, Monday through Friday. Our philosophy is that people without IDD don't get to go into the community or don't get to go to community events if their boss needs them to work. So folks we serve working in the community can't either. So as proof of compliance, we submitted our residential handbook statement on how people and services know about community events. It was ruled non-compliant.
All right. Well, not seeing your handbook in front of me at this point in time, not sure exactly why it was, but I will say that individuals that are not disabled that are working can definitely choose whether they want to go to work or not. I know my boss would like me to come into work a lot of days, but I may want to choose to be somewhere else. And, of course, that comes with those risks that are inherently involved. So, it just needs to be written in a way that's doesn't appear to be restrictive or isolating just because they have disabilities. So, if they want to take a time off from work to do something, they should be allowed that choice and ability. So if that's written in that ability is written in your policies or your handbook, then we can review that and make sure that meets the full compliance.
Well, thank you. So Locke follows up and says they can take time off as other employees, but not without notice. So just to follow up there, I appreciate the question, and it looks like we have another here. Says section F regarding home environment. We have 8 apartments in our assisted living. We are licensed for 16. So residents can have roommates and can decorate their apartments the way that they want. We provided pictures. What else are you wanting us to submit in these sections?
Again, I'm going to go back to, we have found from CMS that in trying to make the argument with CMS for pictures alone, they had a lot of questions for us we couldn't answer. So policies and procedures stating that individuals have that choice and are, allowed that right, actually does meet the compliance better than pictures by themselves. Pictures can be great supporting documentation to those policies and procedures. So I hope that answers that question.
Absolutely. Thank you, Russell. More time and space for questions.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
Hello. Hi, this is Ginger Nance with the Fort Scott Presbyterian Village. I am by phone and I can't see the email addresses that you provided on the chat spot. Could you give those verbally?
Absolutely. So this is Percy Turner. Percy Turner's email address is percy.turner@wichita.edu. I believe that Latanya has put her email address up here. Let me scroll up for just a second to grab it. Latanya, you can just break in here and give it. Hold on one second.
This is Latanya. I didn't want to disrupt the flow there, Mr. Percy, but
Yeah,
this is
no, you-
Latanya. My email is LA as in Apple, T as in Tom, O-N as in Nancy, I-A as in Apple, 1 dot right, WRIGHT, at ks.gov. And then I put it out there, if it's going to be remediation and heightened scrutiny, I'm not going to respond to those unless it's simple stuff to get you to the heightened scrutiny tab, and the difference between heightened scrutiny and remediation, because Russell Bowles is over remediation and Colin Warwick is over heightened scrutiny. I do a lot of the communication stuff, or if you need, as Russell has shared, if you need technical assistance, you're frustrated, you don't understand why your evidence is being rejected, and you need a one-to-one, trying to figure things out, because guys, we are here to help as needed. We don't want you to give up and become so frustrated you fall out of it, because we need you all as providers, and to continue to do that. We know you're doing a good job, just figuring out how to prove to CMS that you are doing a good job in the state of Kansas, okay? So a lot of that, again, is going to be the policies and the procedures, as Russell alluded to, that we have found out, putting it in policies and procedures. This is what we do. This is how we do it. And then when ongoing monitoring comes out, or if you're in heightened scrutiny, then that's where we'll do the virtual assessments, or on site whenever this pandemic gets out of the nation, out of Kansas. That's when we'll come out and actually make sure that your practice is matching up to your policies and procedures, okay? So I can help with those type of things, giving ideas, like I responded back to Leslie, because we get a lot of, well, you know, I'm a small agency, I don't know how to write policies. I had my nephew do it in the beginning, or my niece, or my best friend, or my neighbor. We hear that. So I can help you with that, help you brainstorm and think about, okay, here's the question, my evidence was rejected. Latanya, help me out. We have had some guidance sessions in the past to help you out. As Russell said, go to that remediation tab. But again, if you've sent things back in and they're rejected, please reach out to us. You can get through chat. If you miss those emails, or again, come to our stakeholder meetings, ask these questions, participate in these type of opportunities, okay? Thank you.
And
Thank you, Latanya.
I'll put my email address out there as well. So it's Russell with 2 S's and 2 L's dot Bowles, and that's B as in boy, OWLES at ks.gov. And so a lot of those questions, if it's something about wanting to schedule some time to meet, then please include Latanya, and please, for the most part, include Latanya on almost any of the emails that you send, so that one of us can get back with you or check to make sure the other one has got the email as well.
Thank you very much, Russell and Latanya. Go ahead. I'm sorry if I'm interrupting you.
Go ahead. We're ready for some questions.
Ginger, are you okay with your question?
Yes, I am. I'm not sure how to mute myself again on my phone.
I got you. Okay, so we do have some more questions that are popping up via chat, but I do want to take just a minute. It is 11:08. We're going to take a 1 function break. It'll be 5 minutes in length. So do some stretching, grab some water, use the restroom, anything like that. Just want to take just a quick 5 minutes to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves, and then we'll come back and we have at least 3 more questions via chat. And we will just continue on. If you have more questions in the interim, feel free to put it in chat. It will not be lost. So if you're thinking of things, go ahead and do that. But we're going to go ahead and come back at 11:14. It is 11:14. Thank you for reminding me to unmute. We are coming back from our short one function break. There are a few things in the chat that are accumulating, so I'm going to go ahead and get to those. Looks like Russell has unmuted, so I know that he's here. We will start with a question that asks, what happens if all the questions are not remediated by July 1st?
Good question. To be clear, it's only the category 3 questions that we are truly applied to the July 1st date. So that's why we're prioritizing any category 3 heightened scrutiny questions. So with that being said, what happens if category 3 questions are not remediated by July 1st? For those settings that are deemed able to come into compliance, they'll be put on a list and submitted to CMS. And then CMS has informed us that they may pick a sampling of those settings to review. And if they do, they'll let us know how they want to review those. What will happen though is July 1st will be our deadline to remove any heightened scrutiny category 3 questions. So it will only be those questions that are remediated after July 1st for category 3 that will go to CMS. So I think I got Colin's response back on that correct.
Okay, thank you, Russ. The next question says, all the people in residential services at our agency live in their own apartments. I was told that we needed to submit for each individual apartment, which would be 28 submissions on every question. This is a lot of work. Is there any way to submit one form for each apartment site, as there are varying levels of support needs at the different apartment sites?
Okay, so that comes with a few sub questions. To start with, each apartment is considered a setting, and each setting needs to be identified, and that's CMS's guidelines. So with that, what we are looking at is provider level. So not the individuals that you've particularly served. And I know this is kind of a change of concept for a lot, is that we are looking at the provider policies and procedures. So we have found that in situations where you may have multiple settings, that if you pick one setting and you provide policies and procedures at the provider level that would meet compliance for each one of those questions, once that piece of evidence has been deemed to be compliant, then you can just submit that same piece of evidence that is provider level for the rest of your settings that have that question. So you just align it with that question, and then that would allow. So yes, we understand that that's can be a little work intensive. Our website is not set up to be able to submit one piece of evidence and it automatically applies to, I mean, it automatically is submitted for all of that question for that provider. So yes, you would have to go into each setting to attach that piece of evidence to that question.
And thank you, Russ. It looks like our next question is in regards to question H1 on the self-assessment. That question is a facility physically acceptable to persons served at the site? We have ramps, sidewalks, handicap parking. What else could we provide to be in compliance or to add to this section?
Okay, for the most part with that particular question, it is pretty much based on the idea that that setting is accessible by the people that you serve. So if you have someone that I mean, you kind of hit the big parts, but if you have someone that needs a little extra assistance in a certain area, then your policy would say that you would provide that particular type of device or assistance. So, you know, maybe provide some way if you have a push button as a handicap automated door button, like you see in a lot of places where you have to push a button and then it'll open the doors automatically. If you have that, maybe you provide some method to allow that individual access. So it's more stating along the lines that you don't have to run out and make that facility 100% ADA compliant unless you have individuals that are that, and this is final rule and not ADA guidelines. So as far as final rules concerned, it just needs to be accessible to the people you serve. So yeah, if you have a ramp and you have people with wheelchairs, then it is accessible. So your policy would state that you would make or you would provide accessibility for those.
Thank you, Russell. Our next question says, if you want to submit additional evidence and you have already begun remediation, it does not give the option to add later. Is this something that can be done, or do we have to wait for our response from remediation? And this person is noting that they are in category 3 heightened scrutiny.
So yes, the simple answer is yes, you would need to wait for a response. Once evidence is submitted, then our reviewers will review it and let you know how much still needs to be done and what's good about the evidence you submitted. So with that, yes, we simply would have to wait for that. If we didn't wait, then what would happen is evidence could get overlapped and something that may be compliant, and then you submit some change to that then makes it non-compliant. So we like to have the evidence that's submitted at one point. So, can you still hear me, Percy?
Sorry, there's a lot of things going on here. There's some things going on. Okay, thank you, Russell. I do appreciate that. It doesn't look like we have any more questions in the chat. Are there any folks who are either using the phone or who would like to use the raise the hand function to go ahead and ask questions? Okay, so someone asked if the remediation has been submitted, but we have not received a response by July 1st, where does that leave us? This is the same person who's identifying as category 3 heightened scrutiny.
Yes. That just leaves you with us looking at it. It's not going to be detrimental to you. It just takes, we've given all providers until July 1st. You just need to give us a little bit of time to review all the heightened scrutiny category 3 questions. So if you have submitted evidence prior to July 1st, and it becomes back compliant, then you're good. And that'll work just fine. And that is why we do, we are trying and working very quickly to get through all this, kind of give you everybody an idea of where we're kind of setting. It's that as of 9:30 this morning, the remediation team had reviewed over 40,000 pieces of evidence for compliance, and over 534 settings have been deemed compliant. So, it's a continual process, and we're still working with it. Again, we are only, we're pretty much trying to prioritize heightened scrutiny category 3 questions at this time. So to make sure that we try to keep providers out of that lag period, but we do fully understand. Again, it takes time to review that much evidence.
And this is LaTanya. I'd like to follow up on that since I deal with a lot of the background stuff and the communication and engagement. So we're really pushing that July 1st date because that's going to show you we have milestones to meet for CMS and showing how we're coming into compliance with the final rule. So we're getting and working and advocating for individuals, for agencies to go ahead and meet that July 1st deadline to submit a strategy, to submit your evidence, and then it's on KDED's side. As Russell was saying, it's up to us to get to that remediation, but you've done your part, that you've picked a strategy, you've submitted evidence, because what that shows is that you're willing to work with the state of Kansas to come into compliance. If you don't pick a strategy or you haven't submitted evidence by that July 1st date, then you're going to go on the other list where I'm watching that list, tracking that list, saying, hey, there's no engagement. And then you're going to come into extra scrutiny. And we're wondering what's going on. Why aren't you engaging with us? Why aren't you submitting your evidence? Why aren't you picking a strategy? What's going on? So that's what's going to happen if you don't submit, again, pick a strategy or submit evidence for your settings out there, or you've reached out to me, Russell, or somebody, you're going through chat, explaining to us what's going on, because also that communication is engagement. I'm watching that list. As I've been on this phone call, I've got an update from WSU pulling that data. So I am watching who's engaging and who's not engaging. So I know I've been working the heightened scrutiny list. A lot of you that has heightened scrutiny settings are familiar with me calling you and trying to get you to, hey, engage with us, what's going on. So please reach out to me. We don't want you out there not engaging, because again, after July 1st, you're going to go onto our additional scrutiny list, okay? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, both Russell and LaTanya, for following up there. Yeah, so everybody is still here and still good. Do we have any further questions? Again, feel free to unmute if you are calling in, use the raise hand function, or type things in chat. We will give some extra time. And like I said, we do have some questions that were kind of frequently asked that we can go to, but we want to make sure that all of this time, or as much of this time as possible, is dedicated to answering your questions.
So Percy, while we've got a little bit while we're waiting on some responses. I do have one in particular I would like to address that we've kind of noticed as before, and just to help providers understand the difference between the original assessment that was put out and how that transitioned towards evidence that we're asking for in remediation.
Okay, go ahead.
So some of the questions, in essence, like question C5, which asks if you are providing services only to people with disabilities. You know, that's pretty straightforward, yes or no question. There's nothing wrong with you are doing that. And matter of fact, there's absolutely nothing. It just lets us kind of have a trigger to know, okay, is there a possibility that this may be isolating? So we kind of change our direction with some of those questions in what we're looking for. And when it comes to policies and procedures, we're looking for policies and procedures that basically respond to individuals with disabilities have the same rights and opportunities as those individuals who are not disabled. So again, you know, just taking a look at some of the questions, and it may be a straightforward yes or no. And yes, we got where you answered yes or no and provided some evidence for that, but there's nothing wrong with providing services solely to people with disabilities. It's just that we need to know they're not being isolated solely due to their disabilities. They have the same rights and abilities as those who are not disabled in the community. So I kind of wanted to touch on and address that because I have gotten quite a few questions or in reference to questions along that lines that are out there. And again, that also kind of triggered to improving to CMS that what meets good evidence to them, and for us to be able to have that good debate argument and prove that all of our providers are meeting that final rule compliance policies and procedures have been the best way for us to present that information to CMS. So.
Okay, thank you for that. We do have first a little bit of appreciation, which I always love to kind of draw out for as long as possible so that we may bask in good opinions. Thank you for clarifying some of the questions we've had today. You are all appreciated. Thank you. And having that said, we have another question. Some providers are not making steps toward coming into compliance of the spirit of the final rule, like restricting things that are not person-centered. Some of them are saying, well, final rule, quote, isn't until next year. What advice would you give those providers?
My advice would be don't wait until next year, because next year, or I guess in essentially, anytime, March 17th, 2023 is the deadline, and this is what will happen after March 17th of 2023. If you are receiving HCBS funding, then on March 18th, you will no longer, if you are not compliant, you will no longer be able to receive HCBS Medicaid funds. So waiting until next year, remember, we have to assess you. We have to have time to review that documentation and get back to you and help you do what you need to do, maybe reword some policies or put together some policies. So our advice is don't wait until the last minute, because the other part of that is if you are not an HCBS provider and you're not coming into compliance, then Well, you're not going to get paid for that HCBS, and the clients that you do have, the state is going to be required to transition to a compliant provider.
And this is LaTanya. I'll follow up with that. Oops, sorry, Russell, were you done?
No, I'm done. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what I was going to remind everybody. Remember, next fall is we start transition. So as Russell said, you got to do your assessment, you got to submit evidence, you got to get that evidence reviewed, you got to work back and forth to collaborate with the community connections team to get you to compliance. So that takes time. Okay, so give yourself plenty of time to go through that, because remember, we are in the process of waiting on CMS to approve our ongoing monitoring. And so with ongoing monitoring, because once you get compliant, we are working on their approval we're going to have a certification process with the state of Kansas. So that's going to tie into KMAP. And, you know, when you get your licensing and all of that, all of this is going to tie together for HCBS compliance with the final rule. So when we get that, we're hoping to have all that together, you know, as soon as possible, and get those processes out there and say, hey, this is our process. Hey, you've got your compliance settings. That's why we're asking you, when you get a new setting, notify us of that, because if you're continuing to come into compliance, and then we can transition everything over and say, you're done, you've done your work. When we go, you'll just move into ongoing, the ongoing monitoring process, and because you've got your certification when we get approval from CMS. But if you're somebody out there, you're waiting to come to the door at the last minute, then you're down on the lower end of our priority list, because we're going to be working to get those that have been working with us, working to get their settings into compliance. We're going to get them out of the way first. So if you're just starting, you want to start next year, think about the clock is ticking. So when September comes next year, it's time to start transitioning. And we're not going to be able to jump and get everything done at the last minute, because as you see, it takes time. We've been working on this, for a year, going on a year and a half. And so you risk the possibility of losing that funding for those individuals, okay? So just a reminder of that, and please share that with other CDDOs. If you're on the line, share that with those that are saying, because I've heard it too, well, we have until March 17th, 2023. Yes, but just think about, you may lose that funding, because as Russell has said, March 18th, CMS shuts the money off, and Kansas has no control over that. Okay, thank you.
Just because I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't do this, because I always do. From a technical standpoint, if you wait until the last minute, anything that could go wrong will go wrong. That includes your internet not working well, the website not accepting your submissions, you being unable to get in and log in because your password, you put a 7 instead of a 6. When I tell you that as somebody who manages a lot of the chat interactions, I have heard it all. So you also think about the amount of time that you need to set aside just for technical things. At least 2 or 3 times a day, my computer forgets that it's a computer and it does other things. It tries to be a paperweight, perhaps a cooling fan. It does a whole bunch of things instead of doing what I've asked it to do. So there's also an element here that it would be very, very unfortunate if in the midst of waiting that you recognize now that the day before something is due, that your internet is bad, or your computer is shutting down, or you've accidentally deleted a file and you don't have time to go out and recreate it. All of those things are things that have happened to folks who've waited until late in the game to try and turn something in. So as much as it's, funding and things like that are super important, I also want to just point out that don't put yourself in a position where you have to rely on the technology that's available to you in a pinch, because it will fail you. We do have another question asking specifically about remediation. They are writing their strategies. They are submitting a handbook or policies under other. They say they are not able to upload the entirety of the policy. So Russell, this is for you. Would you want us to copy and paste the policy specifically, or just the section that is specific to that area? What they'll normally do is put the date that they added this to their site, Is this the correct way, or is there a better way to get this done?
All right, yeah, I can answer that one to start with. If you're submitting your evidence in the strategy part, you're cutting and pasting, that evidence is not being reviewed for compliance. That is just your strategy. So if you're wanting to update or submit a policy, on almost every question, there is a checkbox that allows you to modify or submit policies. You would check that, then it would open up a place for you to upload that document. And that's where that document would go. Because if you are just uploading it into the other strategy piece, that document is not moving beyond that location. So you do need to, if you submit in the other is for things that don't meet the checkboxes that are available for that question. So if you want to do something different than what one of those is for, you can put in other and say, you know, I'd like to remodel my building, as an example, and put it in there. Anytime that you submit to other, it has to go through another review process for that before you can even start to submit evidence. If you select in one of the checkboxes that are for that question that may fit what you're wanting to do, check that box, put in a date that you plan to have this completed by, and then it'll open it up and automatically allow you to submit evidence. If you put anything, again, put anything and check the other box, it is waiting for someone to review your strategy and then provide you some feedback and open it up for you to submit evidence. So I hope that's helpful in answering that question.
Okay. Let's see. Thank you very much, Russ. And we have about 20 minutes left of our time. Just want to make sure that we are answering all the questions possible. We don't have any more waiting in chat. If people would like to, you're more than welcome to use the raise hand function and be acknowledged, or if you were on the phone, to unmute and ask any questions that you need. We do, like I said, we have some preloaded ones that have been frequently asked, so we can do that as well, but I want to give some time. Okay, so there's a couple questions here that I will just read, and hopefully these will spawn some more questions from you or add some clarity that maybe you didn't even know you were looking for. So we'll go to a remediation question. One says, what is meant by do I also offer day services? What services are considered day services?
All right. Thank you, Percy. Day services, those are actually KMAP titled services that are billable. So a day service, whether it's called day service, which is an IDD term, or whether it's called something else along the lines of day services, that is where you offer services during the day for individuals that are activity or work related. And when I say work related, not specific to, or not, they are not specific to a particular job, but work in general. So, you know, how to write a resume is a work in general type of thing. Learning how to show up on time would be work related, things like that. So if you're kind of offering those type of services during the day, or activities that individuals like to do, those might be considered day services. And it is not a problem to offer day services and residential services at the same site. Again, you just need to make sure that in policy and procedure that you're indicating that individuals are not being isolated solely due to their disability and have the same access to the community as people without disabilities. So.
Thank you, Russell. Give another few minutes in case that has sparked some questions for folks. Again, feel free to type in chat, unmute, or use the raise hand function. Okay, I don't see anything as of right now. I do have one more. This one, it touches on heightened scrutiny as well as remediation. It says, what if I already have something compliant in remediation and the virtual assessment disagrees?
Good question, Percy. When we are looking at the remediation side, we are strictly looking at the paper that you submit as evidence. So that's a difference between policy procedures and the actual practice that's involved. So when the on-site goes out and looks, they're looking to see if your policy and procedure that you have in place is actually being followed. So in other words, linking that practice of following the policy or procedure and having that information available. So again, it's the link between policies and procedures and putting those into function. Thank you, Percy.
Perfect. And we do have a question here regarding section F4, or question F4 rather. They say our facility does not have locks on bedroom doors. We do have locks on bathroom and apartment doors. How do we handle this?
Okay, so with that, if you have locks on the apartment doors, to me, that would fall under the idea that, let me read it somewhere. I've got to find that actually. It does talk about that your locks would be to the actual living space. So again, preferred evidence for that would be a policy procedure indicating entrance doors can be locked by person served and only appropriate staff have the keys to the doors. And entrance doors may indicate doors to the individual's personal living space. So personal living space can be defined as their apartment, their bedroom, if they have multiple bedrooms in a location. So yes. And if it's a community bathroom, then that would apply towards it's their personal living space when they're utilizing that particular bathroom. And again, final rule doesn't specify the type of lock that should be on there. So If you have questions about the type of lock that's on a door, I would reach out to the fire marshal and ask them if that lock meets the fire marshal criteria.
Okay, thank you, Russell. We'll have about 10 minutes. We want to make sure that we're getting all questions asked. I want to, since we're kind of winding down to the end of our meeting, to let folks know that we will be giving a survey to just kind of help us understand the effectiveness of this particular session and what we can be doing to continue to encourage engagement and to just kind of rate how we've done here and let that inform what we'll do in the future. So if you could take a moment or so, I think that's coming up via email. Zane, is that right? I don't know the medium in which it's being delivered.
Yeah. It'll be emailed to the email addresses provided.
So if you could just take a moment of your time, I know that you've given us so many today. If you could take a moment of your time and fill out that email survey, we would love to hear your responses. Keep in mind, we also have our live chat as a resource. Russell kind of said a little bit earlier today, we also have a slew of remediation resources located on our Community Connection site. There are some evidence guidance resources there. There are also some requirements in terms of what policy should look like, what are some elements that should be included in all policies. So I think all those things are going to be particularly helpful to you. We've also kind of given out a fair amount of emails for people who want to connect more individually or specifically with a member of the team. So having that said, if there's no last minute questions, why don't we go ahead and bring the meeting to a close? I'll give a few more moments for any last questions and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Percy. This is Russell, and I do want to remind everybody, we did give out our emails. Russell and LaTanya are only two people. And just to kind of give you an idea is that just in the current remediation process, there are over 339 providers. So responding, and each one of them may have a whole lot of settings and they may have questions about. So please give us a little time to review that and get back with you on that. As we're also working multiple other aspects of the Community Connections team. And if you do hear the term Community Connections, that is synonymous for Kansas with the final settings rule. And if anybody wants access to the final settings rule, that I believe, Zane, help me out, I believe that is on the homepage under one of the tabs of the actual rule. So give you the opportunity to go look at the actual federal rule. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, last call. Questions, concerns, comments, just unabashed and undue praise for me. Anything?
And if you're shy, I know, is it on that, the survey, you can put your information on there. You can speak to LaTanya. LaTanya doesn't share anything. Or you can be anonymous. And also if there's any other training, do you want more Q&As? If there's something that we missed here today and you're shy, you didn't want to speak up because you think you're the only one, which you're not, with that question or needing assistance in an area, please put that on that survey and I will work to do another Q&A specific to that, or, some type of training for all of you, or report out on our next stakeholder call. So again, if you're not a part, you don't know about the information that comes out, again, go to communityconnectionsks.org and scroll down and you can join that distribution list, because when these things come out or we have training or any other information we need to share, it's going to come out on that communityconnectionsks.org email distribution list or be posted there. So I'll put in a plug for communityconnectionsks.org. Thank you.
Yeah, everybody, thank you so much for your time and energy around this. And have yourselves a fantastic afternoon. We do have another one of these scheduled for next week. So feel free, if you are registered, to come on by